Good evening, folks. Al Zuccaro here. I'm the publisher of BocaWatch, and I'm the person who conducts these interviews on WRPBITV.com. And welcome to tonight's show. Let me start with telling you what our function is. We foster responsible and sustainable growth. We've been established since 2012. We touch an audience. We used to touch a small audience of faithful followers, but now our audience is reaching over 11,000 emails on a weekly basis with approximately 17,000 followers on Facebook. And we have introduced this new format, which is Boca Video, a weekly internet broadcast in cooperation with this station, highlighting prominent issues of concern in Boca Raton, and fostering topical community matters, hard-hitting interviews with the community's movers and shakers, and presenting call-to-action suggestions that encourage a resident-friendly government approach in a developer-friendly government community. Stay tuned. Okay, this week's show will feature Councilman Jeremy Rogers and former Councilman Peter Baranoff. Will be talking about the past, the present, and the future. Thank you. Well, welcome back, folks. Again, it's Al Zuccaro here, and today we are going to be exploring some of the city's past, some of its present, and some of its future with regards to urban green space and the downtown and some of the properties that are at stake right now. As you know, on November 8th, there's going to be a referendum that will decide whether or not to commercialize what has been called, or what is known as, the wildflower site. But it's a bigger question than that, and that is the commercialization of any of the public-owned land along the Intercoastal Waterway. Sitting with me right now is Peter Baranoff. Peter, welcome. Thank you very much for making yourself available. Peter is a businessman. He runs 23 hospitals around the country under the name of Promise Healthcare. He's a former city council member and deputy mayor here in the city of Boca Raton, and was on the council at the time of the acquisition of the wildflower site. So he can bring us perspective that is quite enlightening, with institutional knowledge that I could never give you because I wasn't even in town when that happened. So Peter, thank you for taking the time for coming today.
My pleasure, Al.
With the opening comment that I just made, you know what where the conversation is going. November 8th, we've got the referendum. People are going to be asked for a preference. Basically, it boils down to, do you want a park or do you want a restaurant on the wildflower site? You were there. Could you give us a perspective on how we even acquired that property?
Sure. As most people know, as it's known, the wildflower site had been vacant for quite a while. The site years ago was the famous Wildflower nightclub. Restaurant next door, Maxwell's, was there for years. Many people certainly remember that. And it sat dormant. It was owned by a third-party developer who had a vision for what they wanted to see happen with the property. And that vision wasn't moving in any positive direction. And at the time, an individual came forward that was representing that developer and made a proposal for the city to acquire that property. It appeared at the time, from the standpoint of the residents, that certainly it's sitting dormant and vacant. It certainly doesn't look good. Was an opportunity for the city to acquire it at a very reasonable cost, and we were notified as members of the council by the city manager that it was available, and we decided that we wanted to pursue that opportunity and acquire it.
Now, what year was that?
That was in the, I believe it was approximately 2004-05, in that neighborhood year. And at the time, in our discussions, we had looked at that property, not for it to become commercialized as much as the conversation is now. You know, when you run for city council, one of the famous slogans that most candidates use is Boca Raton is a great place to live, work, and play.
Right, exactly.
Well, the live, we know, wonderful city, and work, many of us who have businesses here, including I, consider this a great place to operate a business, or certainly in my case, a corporate headquarters. But the play part is important because it's the amenities to the citizen. And the amenities are certainly beach, amenities are recreation uses, whether it be tennis centers, golf courses, which is probably a topic for another day.
Yes.
And also the intercoastal water right, which we know for the special holiday boat parade, people line, people use with their boats. It's just the intercoastal is amenity. Well, how is that amenity really used? Well, if you're not a boater, you basically got to walk to one of the bridges. You don't see too many people standing on the bridges other than fishing maybe. And, that's questionable with the cars coming by, how safe that is. And then we take a look at, right next to the Boca Resort, our little boat ramp on the other side of Palmetto Park Road.
Yep.
Used by boaters, bringing their boats up and down, limited recreation area. So here was, at least for me, a classic opportunity of using that space, park-like, and probably having an amenity or a refreshment type area, because there's limited places for people to buy food or beverage right near there.
Well, since you've left the council, and in my years that I've been in Boca, it seems like there is an overwhelming desire to overdevelop everything. The downtown, one of the critical issues that's being raised by the petition committee is that the downtown has actually no recreational opportunities for people that live in the downtown. So that live, work, and play issue comes into bearing. The Wildflower site and all of the intercoastal presents those opportunities. What was the general mood of the consensus of the council at the time that the city chose to acquire the property?
At the time, the mood was that it would be available for all the citizens. It was never going to be where if you weren't going to the restaurant that would be there, you couldn't be on the property. It was supposed to be an area where you could access the waterfront. It was an area where that you could take your family. But it wasn't going to ever be limited to one use with one restaurant, with one parking lot, and you had to cut through the restaurant to get to the walkway.
Yes.
Now, I watched with great interest your interview with James Hendry, and talking about the referendum and the votes that he received, and he actually received more votes than he needed to actually bring us to ballot.
Over twice as many.
Over twice as many. And I believe the citizens certainly should get what they paid for. And I don't believe, just because it's a new council from the past, that you change the direction that the citizens gave you.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, because there are people that are attempting to rewrite history. Some people, particularly the Chamber of Commerce, is arguing that it was bought with the intention of commercializing it, and that is not borne out by the public record, and not borne out by your comments here today.
I will tell you, someone who has a business in the town, I support the Chamber in many of its efforts, but in this case, I disagree. This is an amenity. And I applaud the citizens for stepping up. And I applaud James and others in his group for doing that. Because at the time, the play part of live, work, and play really needed to be expanded. And, unfortunately, Al, the trend, and I don't believe it's definitely as a result of the downtown, Ordinance 4035 was the ordinance that protected the downtown and created the CRA.
Yes.
Now, obviously, there's development along Palmetto Park Road. There's development that, quite frankly, there are many people who don't support it. But we want to create a downtown vibrant area. It was always that vision. Heights are being respected. and that's always been a controversial issue. But the issue of having access to the beach, the intercoastal, this is an important property, and I really believe the park-like approach should be adhered to, because that's what the citizens wanted then, and I don't believe the council, just because elected, should change. And I also believe that, I've lived west, I've lived east. I lived in a country club community, now I live in a residential community near the water. And there are many different ways of life in any city. We have a council today where, quite frankly, none of them really, other than one, live near the water. And, they live in the country club communities, 4 out of the 5. And certainly, this type of amenity one has to recognize, because the play piece has to be for all citizens.
Yes. I have, we're coming to the end of the interview. You said earlier that we raised the question of the golf courses, and we have a lot of issues with regards to Boca Chica and the municipal course. I'd love to have you come back and we can explore those opportunities as well. You may be following this debate that's going on between the city and the Beach and Park District. There is a lot that the institutional knowledge that you have is incredible, and I'd love to be able to invite you back to do this again.
I'd love to do it, Al. When I was there, I helped create the first meeting between the beach and parks and the city. There should be more, and I'd be more than happy to talk about another amenity, the golf course. Thanks, Al.
Thank you very much for coming. Folks, that is an incredible interview. I want to thank Mr. Baranoff for coming here. And the next interview when we get back from break will be with current council member Jeremy Rogers. We'll get his take and his perspective on this issue as well. Thank you. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, folks. As you know, we are exploring the city's urban green space, past, present, and future. Earlier, with Mr. Baranoff, we talked about the past and how we got to the point where we are in the present. Joining me now is Council Member Jeremy Rogers, who is now been a council member for going on 2 years, or getting close to 2 years.
I think we're a year and a half.
And he is going to, or I'm going to try and get him to explore the city from the present and future perspective with regards to the downtown and the urban green space, and particularly with regards to the petition that's up for a vote on November 8th. So welcome. Thank you very much. I know it was last minute, but you're here.
Happy to be here.
I appreciate that. With that as a backdrop, what I just said, there is a raging debate going on in the city of Boca Raton right now with regards to development, with regards to urban green space. You have a RFP on the streets where you've hired an outside consultant to do an analysis of the park situation along the intracoastal and the city parks. There is a ton of activity and a very heightened political climate amongst the residents. And we're going to find out what their thoughts are on November 8th with regards to the wildflower site and with the other intracoastal properties. I'd like to get some of your perspective from over the last few years that you've been involved, what you see, what you think, and where you see the future is for the urban green space preservation for the new residents that are coming into Boca Raton. That'll be in the thousands, actually, over the next few years.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because, there's a lot of people have seen the new construction that's come out of the ground, and they say, where is everyone going to go? And, the part that they don't realize is there's been projects that have been approved long before I even got on council that are yet to even break ground, some sizable ones. So even if we were not to approve a single thing starting today, there's still a lot of residents who are coming to downtown. So how are those people going to recreate, get access to the waterfront, hang out at the parks is certainly an important issue. In particular, I mean, the waterfront development plan, or how we're going to use our waterfront, it was a top goal, and it was my top goal that came out of our annual goal session. We have a lot of acreage on the intercoastal, on the beach, that a lot of people don't really have access to. And whether we're talking about Lake Wyman or Lake Rutherford or Gumbo Limbo or Red Reef or the Wildflower Site, all of these are very valuable and well-located properties that the average citizen can't get to right now. So that's a problem. I think we need to do a much better job in that, and not only providing new opportunities, but maintaining the ones we have. So just in our workshop today, and I know we're short on time, but to cover it, we talked about the Lake Wyman plan. How are we going to reopen those canoe paths that are in there? Yep. And it's a shame that they even got closed. How are we going to reopen the boardwalk there? And whether it's that or the Gumbo Limbo boardwalk, we need to make sure that all of our residents have access to the waterfront, and that's a top goal for me.
Well, on the Lake Wyman thing, there are a few vocal people in the Golden Harbor area that make more of a problem than, or argue more for that it's a problem than it's not. Mm-hmm. But they can be satisfied. But getting back to the recreation and the development issues, in the downtown core, the only public space is Sanborn Square. And there is no other green spaces for people to walk to enjoy. So I
would say the center of Meisner Park too, maybe.
Well, the center of Meisner Park, yes, but it's part of that commercial development. The waterfront doesn't have any access. So this debate that's going on with the referendum for November 8th is really a critical debate as to what's going to happen with the Wildflower Site when you boil it all down. Your perspective on that, the alternative, it doesn't have to be 100% restaurant, 100% park. Mm-hmm. There is a medium, and some of the citizens have brought forward a lot of good ideas. What are your thoughts with regards to the alternative ideas?
So I think there's some great ideas out there. If you go back on the history of the wildflower and how we got where we are now, I mean, Hillstone basically entered an RFP, it was accepted. It was the council at that time gave direction to negotiate a lease with it, and that's kind of where we find ourselves now. There's a survey that was done before that, some argument on the interpretation of that survey. I would say both sides have a little bit of validity to them, but the response to the survey was so small that you really can't take it into too strong of a decision process on that. So where we are now is we have a referendum in front of us. I think it's great to see the public involvement and the public engagement on that. That's been really positive. When a few of the people who were saying that council members weren't listening and there wasn't, they weren't getting the fair attention, I said, go get a book of emails or a book of petitions, because then we have to listen. That gets the attention whether you want it or not, and it shows you're not a special interest and just concerned about your backyard. It's a lot. If it's 2 or 3 people or even 10 people who live on the water saying that, that's a big difference than 1,500 signed petitions from people who live in the city. Then, it raises the question. I think that's good that they followed that. I'm glad that was followed. I'm not fully I wish the question had been asked a little more directly. So the concern I have is I've talked to many people who are on both sides of it. Some people, and they tend to be more in the West, say, where's my restaurant? I wish I could go to go eat on the water, and they just call it Euston's. They hear Euston's. And I've heard a lot of other people say, I don't want anything there. And I've heard a vast, as you said, there's kind of a big spectrum in between. Okay, food trucks, Starbucks, hot dog stand, Shake Shack. You can kind of build up to kind of the biggest commercial use that's there. And I think regardless what goes there, whether this referendum passes or not, and we could talk a little bit more about the pluses and minuses of it, but regardless of what goes at this site, we need to ensure that the public has access to the walkway behind it. So even if it does end up being a Hillstone, I think having that public access, having a walkway under the bridge, activating Silver Palm some, that's non-negotiable. And those things are not in the lease right now. So there's been a lot of talk from what's in the lease on reasons to vote against it. You can't guarantee that those things will be addressed when we look at the lease, but I could personally guarantee that I'm not going to support anything that doesn't provide full public access behind there.
Some people argue that the city council, without the direction of the public, has changed or attempted to change the course of history. We earlier today interviewed former council person Peter Baranoff, who was on the council at the time. And he unequivocally states that there was never an intention of the then council that decided to make this purchase to commercialize this purchase. where do you think the city council comes with the enabling power to change the direction of the then city council that made the purchase?
I think I'd disagree with that to some extent. I mean, most of those decisions were made by most of those people on the council. So,
But the point is that the council then bought it specifically for purposes of creating a space for all citizens, not to commercialize. How do we get to the point now where the debate suggests that it was always bought for the purpose of commercializing? That flies in the face of what Mr. Baranoff says, and he was there at the time.
he was there, but everything was publicly recorded, and you know, we could go back and watch them. And certainly, and one sitting mayor at the time has been criticized for saying, you know, access like a park or something like that. I think, so looking at what's best right now, what's most important to me, number one, is what's going to enable the most residents to bring them to the water and access it. And you could argue that, you could say a park might bring more people. You could also argue an eatery might draw more people and give more people access to the water. It really could be argued either way. Fortunately, it's not really clear which one would bring the most, but I think you could say a commercial establishment would bring more people to the water. Some people may say it brings too many people to the water.
Let me, because we're going to run out of time soon, let me take you down a legal argument that was made at the council meeting. The lawyer for the petitioners argued that regardless of what happens on the November 8th ballot, because it's an ordinance, the city council is responsible and has the obligation and the right
to interpret
and implement. It was supported by Deputy Mayor Brown, Deputy City Manager Brown, and by the city attorney. If the ordinance passes, the question was raised at the Federation meeting that the city council could still decide to put the Houston's restaurant there. Would that be something that you would support?
I don't think so. Certainly not without hearing from the public.
Well, if
Again?
it's passed by the public, and the idea of moving forward with the lease, you would support putting the lease in place?
I think if that referendum passes, we need to respect the wishes of the people. So my concern is there's a lot of people who may want a restaurant and still vote for that because the referendum sounds good. They hear recreation space. They may not even realize they're voting against Houston's. But if it passes as it is and it is the city council's obligation to both interpret and write new ordinances. So yeah, if it passes by public referendum, the city council has the ability to do whatever they want and to pass other ordinances that do that. But they also have the ability to get voted out of office, and you know, it wouldn't be right to go against the public's will. I think again, if the question was, do you want a Houston's or Hillstone property at the Wildflower site, I think we would have a clearer answer. I'm a little afraid that you're going to have a lot of voters going out, and at the top of the ticket is a Trump or a Hillary, and everyone's showing up for that, and then they're looking at this and they may not realize, and even if you look at some of the petitioners that have done it, where do you draw the line? The petitioning committee has made the case a smaller restaurant would be okay, but not a fuller one, and then it comes to the city council to determine that. And no matter what, you're opening yourself up to a lawsuit. Hillstone could say, well, why is a Shake Shack allowed? Or vice versa. If we did a Hillstone, then you could get sued by the petition committee who said, what do you mean? We just told you we didn't want this, and it passed, if it passes. So I think it's going to be a gray area, but to answer your question, one, how we got to here, I think many of the sitting council members from that gave direction to move that direction, or council members before myself. And I would certainly look to get either more clarification or not move forward on the Hillstone property if the referendum passed.
Well, thank you for coming today. There are many other topics that we could have talked about,
particularly
with the golf course. In the future, if you will allow me, I'll invite you back. I'd certainly like to explore some of your thoughts with regards to BocaWatch, because I know that you have been a major proponent of that, and I am a major proponent of that. So I thank you for taking the time today.
Golf belongs in our city. You could quote me on that. Thank you.
Golf belongs in our city. We got that one. Now, folks, so thank you very much. You've just heard today the past, the present, and then the present and the future. So we look forward to the next time. Well, folks, we come to the end of another segment, and we're going to do a little bit of a commentary. First of all, as you know, there is an election coming up in the next 2 weeks. We're not going to talk about the national elections or partisan politics. We're going to only talk about the issues that are of concern to the residents and citizens of the city of Boca Raton. So to that end, I want to mention a couple. Number one, don't forget, there is the referendum initiative with regards to intracoastal land owned by the city to be voted upon. Vote yes for Ordinance 5356. That is the ordinance that will guarantee that the parks and publicly owned lands along the intracoastal are never sold or leased to commercial development and remain in perpetuity for the use of the city. I do want to reference that there is a commercial on television, and that commercial is giving you misleading information. That commercial suggests that there is a few rich people trying to create a private park. Nothing more could be untrue. And I suggest that you look at the elements and the items that we have been publishing on BocaWatch over the last few months. Secondly, on Amendment 1, solar, you'll be seeing an interview coming up. Katie McDougall will be doing that interview, where we'll be analyzing that issue from two perspectives. Third, we have the marijuana issue. I actually have some mixed emotions with regards to the marijuana issue. 20 years ago, when I was young and foolish, I would have argued for it. Now, it seems to me that it is not ready and not prepared. We will be doing a little bit more on that between now and the election day. Finally, we have the runoffs in the beach and park districts. BocaWatch has endorsed and continues to endorse the two incumbents, Earl Starkoff over Erin Wright, and Dennis Frisch over Craig Ernst. Please remember to vote on November 8th for Starkoff and Frisch. And finally, we have a number of other items that are being raised with regards to city politics, and we look forward to being able to bring further interviews to you in the not too distant future. Today's show with the council people, Councilman Rogers and former Councilman Baranoff, are the examples of the kinds of programming that we're going to do over a period of time. I thank you very much, and I continue to request that you watch our show on a regular basis. Good night now.